Hello and welcome to the last episode of Season 3 of Chillers and Thrillers. In this podcast, I read true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, skepticism, or gore, only 100% true spooky tales. As the year winds down, I wanted to personally thank you all for tuning into every episode to listen in. This season, I have seen the podcast listeners and YouTube subscribers grow to a point I never expected. This podcast is completely a one-woman show. I love researching all the stories, coming up with themes, and editing the content. So I appreciate all the support and feedback you all have given me. It sincerely means a lot to me. A few big things that happened with the podcast this year that I'm thankful for is that I passed 800 subscribers on YouTube, connected with so many listeners through email, Spotify comments, Instagram, and YouTube, and the podcast made 2 charts. Good Pod's Top Indie Paranormal Podcasts in the 9th position, and recently, Chillers and Thrillers has the 51st spot on FeedSpot's Top 80 Paranormal Podcasts. So thank you all very much. I'm very excited for Season 4. I'll be back on February 15th with more episodes and more true stories. In the meantime, I'll post some shorter episodes on the YouTube channel, and I'm working on an episode centered around listener stories. So if you have any stories or experiences you would like to share, please feel free to reach out. Connor and Thea and Jane Marie, thank you so much for submitting your stories to me. In the meantime, if you're looking for a great podcast that covers true crime specific to Australia, I recommend you check out Crime Scenes and Coffee Beans with Belinda Brady. Belinda does a great job narrating lesser-known criminal cases that occurred in Australia, and I linked her show in the show notes. This episode is published one day before New Year's Eve, and I feel like there's a universal feeling in the world where we all feel the true weight of time on New Year's Eve. We realize how shockingly quick time has gone, but at the same time acknowledge how slow and heavy some periods of our life can be. Sometimes a week can feel like 3 years, and a day can feel like a month. Time is a mysterious thing. Some scientists have proposed that time is not linear, but rather it is similar to a ruffled ribbon. Where certain points of the ribbon touch each other are times or dimensions that overlap over one another. Could these points explain experiences such as premonitions, or maybe even the glitch in the matrix and déjà vu? In this episode, I'm going to read true stories of people who have experienced premonitions, a glitch in the matrix, or just eerie experiences where time acted outside the usual expectations. So let's get started. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and listen in. The View from the Window, submitted by user Gender Neutral Username. My wife and I have twins who were 3.5 when this story happened. If you walk out of our bedroom, the boys' room and our spare bedroom are both straight ahead down a short hallway, and the stairs going down to the first floor are to your immediate right. Entering the boys' room, you see on the far wall one window flanked by their 2 beds on either side. Isaac always on the left and Brandon always on the right. Their window overlooks our driveway and our suburban, firmly middle class street. The neighborhood is decent, but nothing fancy. We do get the occasional idiots revving their engines or playing their music too loud at all hours of the night. But all in all, it's a peaceful neighborhood with no real crime to speak of. One night, my wife had climbed into bed early because she was pregnant and needed a lot of extra sleep before her early shift the next morning. I did some dishes, tidied up the kitchen, watched something on Netflix, and then at around 11:30, I went up the stairs to check on the boys before I got ready for bed myself. I checked their diapers since they were very recently potty trained, tucked them back in, kissed them both on the head. And then on a whim, I glanced out their window through the blinds. Immediately, I felt a chill run down my spine as I spotted a man standing at the edge of our driveway facing our house. He had on jeans and a black zip-up hoodie that hid most of his face. Seeing him standing there with his hands in his pockets unnerved me. Even more so because he seemed to be staring at our front door, like he was waiting for something. At this point, I'll mention that on the spectrum of human trust, I fall on the paranoid side. I always check the locks on our doors at least twice before bed. Same when I'm the last one out of the house during the day. My wife and I own a few guns, and I do pop quizzes where I make sure my wife knows how to safely load, operate, and unload all of them, as well as what to do if there's ever an intruder in our home. As I watch this man observing my house, I'm beginning to formulate an entirely inappropriate "I told you so" in my head to sling at my wife the next day. Suddenly, he looks up and seems to look straight at me. The odds of him seeing me are next to none because I'm peeking out through the mostly closed blinds. The lights are off in the house, and he's standing under a fairly bright streetlight. Still, somehow, I know he's looking right at me. I'm about to grab my phone to call 911 when he surprises me with the creepiest thing I've ever seen. He smiles. A big, broad, self-satisfied smile is the only thing I can see under his hood, and it shakes me to my core. He holds his smile for a few seconds when I hear a loud bang from downstairs. I flinch, scan the room, then return to looking out the window just in time to see him stride straight up our driveway towards the front door. At this point, I bolt into the bedroom and yell our predetermined action phrase at my wife. "Denise, get the gun." Why be coy? It's short, it's unmistakable, and with any luck, it'll scare off anyone who hears it. My wife is startled awake just in time to hear another loud bang from downstairs, followed by another, and another, and another. They seem to be coming from both the back and front doors. Our front door is a heavy metal thing, and I'm not too worried about it, but our back door is all glass, top to bottom. I can't imagine why it hasn't broken yet, but I'm still shouting at my wife, "Get the gun." To her credit, she does, more or less, exactly what we discussed. She grabs her phone, runs into the boys' room, locks the door, and dials 911. I grab my handgun and flashlight and position myself at the top of the stairs, just waiting for the doors to break and the intruder to come in. As far as I'm concerned, they can have the TV and anything else they want as long as they don't set a single toe on those stairs. I keep hearing the bangs from downstairs, but no one is in the house yet. Then, the banging stops. The silence is thick as I listen for footsteps, voices, anything that might tell me why the banging stopped. I creep down the stairs and peek around the corner. First at the back door, which is fully intact, then at the front door, which seems fine as well. I immediately run upstairs and into the other bedroom on the front of our house, our guest room next to the boys' room, and look outside. The guy is back under the streetlight, hands in his pockets, grinning up at me. Suddenly, I hear my boys start to cry from their room. I glance away for a second, but decide I should try to get a better description from when the cops show up. When I look back out the window, the guy is gone. I don't mean he wandered off. I mean that I can see almost all the way up and down my street in both directions from that window, and the guy is gone. I didn't hear a car, and there's really no place he could hide until he just got to the corner, which is several houses away and would be impossible in the half second I wasn't watching the street. I shrug it off and go knock on my boy's door for my wife to let me in. She comes to the door in tears and keeps saying how her phone wouldn't work. Apparently her phone froze up and rebooted, so she couldn't even dial out for the cops. She asked me what happened, and I didn't know what to tell her. I tell her to go lock the door again while I look around downstairs. After checking everything, I can't find any sign that anyone had been there. The glass door in the back is completely intact, and nothing is even remotely out of place. After I get back upstairs, I tell her everything is fine, we'll call the police in the morning. After we secure the guns, I help her put the kids back into bed. And I notice that we put them in the wrong beds, but we're both too tired to do anything about it. My wife tells me she wants to sleep in the boys' room, and I offer to sleep in the narrow hallway at the top of the stairs, just in case. After a long while, we're all back to sleep. In the morning, I wake up to hear my wife getting ready in her bathroom. I'm a very light sleeper, so I walk in and ask her, "How did you get past me in the hallway without waking me up?" And she says, "What do you mean? Didn't you sleep in the boys' room last night?" "What? No, I slept in our bed. Why would I sleep in the boys' room?" "I thought we were going to sleep with the boys after what happened last night," I said. "What? What happened last night?" she asked me. After several minutes of this, I come to realize that my wife has no recollection of anything that happened the night before. In my groggy state, I start to feel like maybe it was all just a very vivid dream that I had. I've never experienced lucid dreams or sleep paralysis or anything like that, but I know they exist, so I have to admit it's a possibility that I dreamed the whole thing. I'm shaking my head, trying to wake up enough to wrap my brain around it all. I go in to check on the boys. First, I kiss Isaac in the bed on the right, and then Brandon in the bed on the left. And that's when it hits me. They're in the wrong beds. Cousin's Sense. Submitted by user MeatCat. My cousin has this thing where she can smell things no one else can. One time, when we were teenagers, I was at my cousin's house when her boyfriend came over. We were all going to go sneak into the community pool together that night, but when he got there, she sniffed at him and said, "What the heck? You went swimming without us?" He denied it, but she was adamant that he smelled like chlorine. I couldn't smell anything on him, and his hair was dry, but she kept insisting. We got into a fight, and he left. A week later, he was found dead in the pool, having apparently snuck in alone the night before, slipped, hit his head, and drowned. I didn't really connect those two events until years later at our grandfather's funeral. He'd been pretty healthy, active up to the end. He fell off a ladder while picking oranges from a tree in his yard. And although he broke his leg, it looked like he would recover. But then, he got pneumonia in the hospital and quickly went downhill. At the funeral, my uncle gave a eulogy about how he died doing what he loved, and reminisced about how my cousin used to say he smelled like oranges. And I suddenly remembered that she used to say that when she was a kid. And I also realized that was years before my grandfather moved into the house with the orange tree. It gnawed at me, and that was when I put together how she had smelled chlorine on her boyfriend a week before he drowned. I tried to casually bring up the thing with the oranges to my cousin after the funeral to see if she remembered it the same way I did. But she clammed up and refused to talk about it. I never heard her mention those phantom smells again. I'm trying to believe it's just two sad, strange coincidences. There were lots of other times she smelled things no one smelled, and no one had died. But then, almost 2 decades passed between her smelling oranges on Grandpa and him falling out of the tree. And I kept thinking about how some years ago, before Grandpa died and my cousin stopped talking to me about this stuff, she once told me I smelled like smoke. Look in the mirror, Submitted by user Chana. I grew up in upstate New York in a farmhouse built around 1850 and expanded around 1910. It was set back from a quiet rural road between two highways with no sidewalks and no shoulders for parking. It also just wasn't a road people would typically park on. Creepy things often happened in this house. My mom, sister, and I would hear each other calling the other's name when nobody was. The cats avoided the bit of floor between the stairs and the door. Only my dad never experienced anything odd. I don't believe in ghosts, but if any house in human history was haunted, this house was it. It never felt malevolent. Even my husband, who has spent a lot of time in the house and does not believe in ghosts, believes that paranormal is not real, but that house is haunted. When I was a young teen in the early 1990s, maybe 13 years old, I was alone in the early evenings as both parents worked odd hours and my sister had some sort of sports practice. I was a good kid and decided to do the dishes. The kitchen window looked out over a meadow, and you could see a bit of the road to the left behind some trees. The water was going, and I had the local alternative rock radio station on. Wouldn't have heard much, if anything. Suddenly, I hear a voice in my head that doesn't feel like my voice or that I came from me. It's what I imagine people who hear voices experience. The voice was generic and male. I'm a woman. It said, "Go in the bathroom and look in the mirror." I don't think much about it. I turn off the tap, walk across the back of the house, and look in the bathroom mirror. It was angled such that it reflected the window to the right, through which you could see the long driveway and a bit of the road in front of the house. In the dusk, I saw a car parked on the road. Again, this is a rural road with no shoulder. Nobody's throwing a party, and our somewhat long driveway is empty, so anyone stopping by would park in the driveway. No lights on, which was odd for that time of day. Our front door is unlocked, as usual. Small town and everything. I'm freaked out. And now the voice says, "Go in the living room and turn on a light." The living room windows faces the road, and it'd be immediately apparent someone was home. I kind of argued with the voice. I was that kind of teen. If I turn on the light, the car will know someone is home. And the voice actually replies to me, which I didn't think voices in your head did. Not that I'd really experienced any such things. And it says, "Yes, but they want to rob the place, not murder anyone. They'll go away if they see someone is home." Logically, that both makes sense and doesn't. Most burglars aren't interested in murder. But with no cars in the driveway, smart burglars would be able to deduce that it would likely be a teen at home alone. The voice in my head said, "They don't want to murder you. They don't want to hurt you, but you have to turn that light on now." I walk into the living room with the daylight rapidly fading and turn on the nearest lamp. Just before I do, I see a door to the car begin to open. Immediately, the door closes and the car takes off quickly, doesn't even turn on the headlights. And the voice says, "I told you they'd go away." I probably turn on every light that faces the road until my parents come home, upstairs and down. They asked why I've lit the place up, but I was too freaked out to tell them. Many years later, I read The Gift of Fear and wondered if it was my own intuition picking up on something my conscious mind hadn't registered, like a car driving too slow and without headlights on that bit of road, or the sound of it stopping or something. Perhaps my unconscious brain told my conscious brain things. Perhaps intuitively, I knew they were casing the house, but not murderers. Certainly, that seems likely regarding turning on the living room light. But if it did, why was the voice male? And why did I have a full conversation with it? The Waiting Girl, submitted by user Kura Wapple. I remember being pretty young, around 9 or 10, and I was in the car park of a pub in England in the South End. I remember seeing someone in their teens in the window of a house looking over the car park. They waved at me, and I felt like I knew them somehow. My parents asked who I was waving at, and I said, just some lady in the window above. I didn't think much of it. Fast forward 10 years, I was at my nan's new house. I remember walking into her room, which I was never allowed to do, and going to the window. I then realized I was in the house looking over the same parking lot and remembering the interaction years before. Then, a girl, around 9 or 10, was in the car park waving at me, and I waved back. And that feeling came back, and I felt like I knew her. I could never explain it and have never told anyone about it, but it freaked me out. The Last BART Home, submitted by user Betty Oof. This happened when I was 14 or so, riding the Last BART home from a date with my boyfriend who lived in San Francisco. I lived in Berkeley at the time. I got on the train at the Civic Center station, as usual, and by the time we were going under the bay, there was only one other person in the car with me, a 30-something woman, rubbing lotion all over her legs and feet. Gross, I know. I was trying as hard as I could to ignore her and listen to my CD player. The train stopped at 12th Street, perfectly normal, and kept going. It slowed down a little more quickly than I was used to, though, and the doors opened on a station that was definitely not 19th Street. It had the same basic design, ugly 1970s painted brick, but it was dingy, and everything looked sort of old and yellow. Think of the subway in the movie The Wiz. There were people shuffling around, many more than you'd expect to see at 1 a.m., and they were all dressed in very dirty, dingy clothes, the kind of outfits you'd expect to see on a homeless person in the 1970s. I looked up and saw the station sign, which said 17th Street, a station that has never existed. The doors closed, and I immediately looked over to the lotion lady, who seemed to be as freaked out as I was. She'd seen it too and had no idea what was going on. The train pulled out of the station and almost immediately stopped again at 19th Street. We spent the rest of the ride trying to puzzle out any logical explanation for what we'd seen, but nothing made sense. My mom picked me up at the station, and when I told her, she was convinced I'd fallen asleep. But if I had, how could the other woman have seen it as well? The Flowers, submitted by user You're a Moron. I was catching a SkyTrain in one particular city about 15 minutes from where I got off. While I wait, there's a woman with glazed eyes asking people for money. She came up to me, stopped briefly, and asked, "Excuse me, could you spare some money? My brother's in the hospital, and I'd like some money to buy him flowers." That's rich, I thought. Drug addicts are getting more and more obvious with their lines. "Here's $5. I gave it to her without even looking her in the face, convinced of her intentions. Anyway, my train pulls up and I get on. I look through the glass at her walking around, asking others for money as the train pulls away. The train arrives at the station about 15 minutes later, and I walk down and out to the bus stop. There is only one bus in the direction I'm going, and just my luck, it's there waiting for me when I get off the train. So on the bus I hop and wait for the bus driver to finish reading his paper before the doors close and we embark down the highway. About 5 to 10 minutes of traveling, the driver pulls over for a routine stop. The doors open, and to my complete astonishment, the woman from the SkyTrain walks into the bus, a dozen roses in hand. She looks me right in the eye as she walks past to take her seat. How in the blue hell did she get there? I took the train before her. I watched her at the train stop from inside as we pulled away. I went over a river. I caught the first and only bus going this particular direction. And not only did she beat me there, she still had time to go to the store and buy a dozen roses. Building the Hell. Submitted by Anonymous. When I was a freshman in college at the University of Texas A&M, I lived in a north side dorm and participated in something that was called CUT and also Building the Hell. It was the annual tradition of constructing the campus bonfire that was burned every year before the game against the team in Austin. The bonfire was not your run-of-the-mill pile of trash, though it started out like that years before. It could reach over 100 feet tall and was constructed with thousands of logs. Living in the dorms, we had access to a TV channel that had a live feed camera that sat atop one of the taller buildings on campus and was focused on the polo fields where bonfire was built every year. With the perimeter poles up shining spotlights, the area was so bright it looked like a day construction site in the middle of the night. The camera was on 24 hours a day, and the closer it got to Thanksgiving, the more hours were put into the construction. Crews took turns working nights and were on a 24-hour schedule to get the job completed. While the channel was always available, it wasn't actually too terribly interesting to watch, and was seldom on in our room. It was Wednesday, November 17, 1999. Wednesday was the day of the week that my dorm was off from helping build. My roommates and I were asleep in our dorm room when the phone rang. Unfortunately, my bed was closest to the phone. When I rolled over and predicting a drunk dial friend needing a ride, answered, "What?" My roommate's mother's voice came urgently through the receiver. "Brandon, is Michael okay?" My roommate was my high school buddy Michael, and he was a bit of a mama's boy. His mom called often, and having known her growing up and hanging out with her son, I'd often give her a hard time for calling too often and babying him. "Yeah, he's here sleeping, like what I was doing before you called." I looked at the clock, and it reads 2:21 a.m. "Can I speak with him?" She pled with a kind of urgency that made me start to worry that maybe there was an emergency in their family. Still, her initial question of, "Is Michael okay?" was strange. Michael sleeps like a rock, so he didn't hear this exchange. I yelled his name and threw the phone at his head across our tiny dorm room. "It's your mom for some reason." He sat up and started talking to his mother. "Yes." "Why?" "Yeah, we're here." "He's okay." "I'm okay." "Uh-huh." "Oh. Okay, that's strange." This went on for a little bit as I sat in the darkness. Finally, he hung up with his mother and lay there. "Anything wrong?" I asked. "She had a very bad feeling that I was in trouble or had died," he said. "It's 2:21 a.m. on a Wednesday, and your mother just woke up in Dallas, Texas from a bad dream and had a feeling so bad she had to call you and see if you were still alive." "Yep." "That's nuts, man." I shook my head. He told me his mom has always been a little tuned like that. She would get strange feelings, bad premonitions, and the like. I think he had some examples from the past, but I've forgotten them by now. Now wide awake, I turned the television on for something to distract me back to sleep. For some reason, the TV was on the Bonfire channel. This is not a commonly watched channel. It was high in the channel listing, nowhere near the channel we left the TV on, and nowhere near the 3 the TV had to be on to play N64. Instead of bright lights and a clear view of the bonfire, there was a mess of logs. There were people moving frantically. The channel suddenly blurred out. While it never went black, someone had taken the focus completely out, so now there was only blurry light mosaics to be seen. I looked at my roommate. We sat there a little longer, staring at the strange channel. After a while, the light mosaics changed colors, Flashing red and blue colors could be seen mixed in with the white tones. Worried the bonfire had fallen, it had fallen in the past and been rebuilt quickly, we ran out to the site. We were greeted by emergency personnel, lights, tears, chaos. We didn't realize that 12 of our fellow students had just lost their lives. Over the next few hours, hundreds of students began showing up as word spread. We made an effort to help move logs in large groups, but eventually we were all moved away to watch from afar. Months later, the investigation complete, the time of the collapse is disputed to be 2:42 a.m., the time written on the police report. To this day, I know the actual time was 2:21 a.m. My experience in Washington's Cascade Mountains, submitted by user JackSprat90. I have always loved the outdoors. I was fortunate enough to be born in the Great Pacific Northwest, the Western Washington Cascades to be exact. My father and I spent much of my early years of life exploring the mountains, fishing, and hunting. There are parts of the Cascades I know like the back of my hand. One of those places is called Goblin Creek, up the Index Galima Road off Highway 2. When I was a kid, we would drive up there to do some fishing and shooting, but also to collect a specific type of rock that, when cut in half and polished, would resemble a scenic picture of the view of mountains from within a cave. I don't recall the true name of these stones, we just called them picture rocks. Picture rocks. My father's friend and neighbor owned an art gallery mineral shop that used to be a church. If you have ever driven through Startup on your way from Sultan to Gold Bar on Highway 2, you might remember seeing the robot sculpture outside the shop that my dad built. This is the place that we sold the stone for $2 a pound. It was a lucrative revenue for a preteen. The walk from the creek where we harvested these rocks to the dirt road wasn't particularly long, but lengthy enough that you could presumably get lost en route if you didn't know where to go. In the years we spent at this creek, I only had ever seen 2 other people there. One was a game warden that heard the gunshots from our target practicing session and tracked us down to make sure everything was okay. And the other is the subject of my curiosity. When I was 14, I distinctly remember hauling a backpack full of these rocks up from the creek to my dad's truck. Along the way, I ran into a man that looked to be about 30 years old. We both appeared to be surprised that we would run into anyone in this remote section of the mountains. But as I got closer to this man, he was heading down to the creek, I was heading up the road. He seemed to grow increasingly more startled, as if he was seeing a ghost. He didn't say anything as I passed. He just stared at me, seemingly trying to figure out the appropriate words and ask me something. After passing him, I remember thinking how much this guy looked like he could be in my family. The similarities were striking. I continued onto the truck, dumped my load of rocks off at the truck, and headed down to the river to my dad. When I arrived, I told him about the encounter and asked him if he had seen this man, to which he replied he hadn't. I have remembered this encounter quite vividly since then. Last year, I was visiting my family in Snohomish and decided to head up to the old Goblin Creek for nostalgic purposes. It had been about 15 years since I was last there. Along the way, I found out that the Index Galima Road had apparently washed out years before. Luckily, I knew of another way up there via Jack Pass. I found the dirt road and parked where my dad used to park, and proceeded to walk through the woods down to the creek. Along the way, I saw something that absolutely shook me to the core. As I was about halfway through the woods, I was startled to see someone else coming up from the creek. A boy, about 14 years old. He was wearing a backpack that looked to be burdened by heavy weights. As we got closer, I began to get increasingly confused and shocked, as the boy looked exactly like I did at his age. I meant to say something to him as he passed, but could not figure out the right words to express what I was thinking at the moment. He passed me and kept going. I walked a little ways and finally stopped when it all really hit me. I remembered the encounter from my teenage years and realized I had just lived through the other half of the experience. Both the man and boy were me, roughly 15 years removed. I turned around to catch up to the boy in the thick western Washington woods. I ran all the way back up to the road where my truck was, to find nothing. There wasn't anywhere else besides the road for him to go to, and I hadn't stalled so long as not to be able to catch up to him. He was simply gone. Curiosity got the best of me, so I hurried down the creek, half expecting to see my dad fishing on the bank 15 years younger, but found nobody. I ended up going home and deciding that this experience was too unbelievable to tell even my friends and family. I just wanted to get this out there to see what others think, and hopefully to see if anyone else has had this experience as well. And that's all for this episode in Season 3. I would like to hear what your favorite episode or story has been this season, so please let me know through email, comment on YouTube, or Spotify. I loved working on all these episodes and could never pick a favorite, but the Man in the Hat stories definitely stuck with me. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can buy me a coffee in the link provided in the show notes. Or best of all, share the podcast with your paranormally inclined friends and family and leave me a review or comment. I wish you all a very happy new year, and I hope your 2025 brings you joy, peace, and good health. Thank you again. I'll see you again on February 15th, and I hope in the meantime, all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe.